Hello everyone, I'm the developer of Naval Warfare, and today I'm going to be doing a mod spotlight of my mod. I'm going to be going through the Naval Warfare guide to show you everything there is to know. I'll be putting timestamps in the description and in the video to let you know where you can find each part. If you just want to know about one specific part, you can use those to skip over there. One quick thing to note before we get started. If you want to play this mod, I highly recommend installing both JEI so you can easily see recipes for things, and Patchouli, which will give you the guidebook. Without Patchouli, the guidebook won't show up. The first thing we'll be going over is the game controller. The game controller is the basis of Naval Warfare. It controls all of the games, and you'll be needing this if you want to actually play any games. Inside the game's requirements tab, there's a little bit of information about the game controller. Basically, all you need to know is it'll face wherever you're facing. It'll face any of the 4 directions you want. And it has 4 different states, which we'll be seeing throughout the video. I'll show you a little preview of them here. When it's not doing anything, you'll see a blue version. If you're editing something, it's brown. If you're waiting to find a game, it's green. And if you're playing a game, it's red. The next item you'll need is the game Interactor. This is what you're going to be using to interact with any games of Naval Warfare. You'll be mostly using this for the controller and for board tiles, which we'll be seeing in a bit. It has 7 modes you can cycle through. You can cycle by right-clicking in the air. The first mode we'll be looking at is creating a new ship configuration. You just right-click the game controller and it'll spawn a board for you to place your ships on. I'll explain how this works further in a bit. The second mode is saving the configuration. If you use the create mode, it'll automatically jump to this for you. Well, again, I'll show this in a bit when we cover building loadouts. The next option is loading a ship configuration. All this does is it sets your controller to edit mode and then it allows you to load a configuration, which again we'll be seeing in a bit. The next option is requesting a game. This is what you'll need to use if you want to start a game. You'll just right click it and it'll start a game. In this case I don't have any loadout set yet, so it's not allowing me to play a game. Again, also, if you're searching a game already, you can also cancel it in case you just suddenly have to go and or nobody's playing at the moment. You can just again right click and cancel it. If you're inside of a game already and you're playing and for whatever reason you just want to stop playing, maybe you're losing a lot, you don't think you're gonna win anymore, or maybe you just suddenly have to go, you can just use this to forfeit. Again, in this case there's no game going on, so nothing's happening. Be aware that there is no confirmation. If you use this forfeit option, you will instantly forfeit. The main reason for this is because the only option you're going to be using in games is this last option, which is targeting tiles, and you kind of have to cycle through all of the options to get back to forfeiting. So that's why there's no confirmation. Targeting tiles I'll show you in a bit once we get to actually playing a game. You'll be using this on board tiles, which look like this. Again, I'll show this all in a bit. In order to build your first loadout, we'll first need to spawn ourselves a board. Just put your game controller on create a new ship configuration, and it'll spawn you a 10x10 board when you right click the game controller. In order to get your first ships, you'll always have a starter kit when you first join a world. You can right click it in the air, which will give you 4 tier 2 ships and 1 tier 3 ships. There's a few ways you can add these to your loadout. The easiest way is to just right click your controller to register it, and then right click somewhere on the board to place it down. Don't worry about these extra tiles being added, we'll get to that when I start explaining the abilities. As you see, the ship got spawned here. If you don't register a ship, it simply won't spawn it. And if it's not able to place in the way you're facing, then it also won't spawn, so make sure you're facing the right way. If you're trying it and it doesn't spawn, just face somewhere else re-register it when you do that, by the way, and it'll place. Another way to place down ships is with the utility tool. Just craft it like so. I'll go into more detail about what this does in a bit, but basically it just basically has 4 modes that help you build your loadouts, which I guess they speak for themselves. You can place a random ship from your inventory by just clicking once. In this case, this one was chosen. Or you can fill the board with all ships from your inventory, so you don't have to do any work yourself. If you're not happy with your loadout, you can also use this option to just move a ship. Just click on it and it'll choose a random spot and a random orientation for it to go in. Or you could just randomize all of them at once as well. And once you're happy, you can use the save mode, which it automatically jumped to for us, to save it. And now, as you can see right here, it's got all the ships saved in here. This particular loadout has 15 health and a board size of 117. If you want to, you can also rename this in an anvil. So, for example, my first loadout. And you've got your first loadout ready to go. Let's go into a bit more detail in about the utility tool. Like we said, we can use this to place any random ships. Something you should know about this and about filling the board is both of these modes will only pull ships from your inventory that are between tier 2 and tier 5. Right now there are 5 tier 1 ships which will not be picked up by the tool. I've got 2 of them in my inventory here. These are the 5 basic ships you'll find in regular battleships game. I've added these 5 in case you don't want to play it with any abilities. Then, well, you can just play regular battleship as well. Just use these 5 ships. So when I use this fill option, you'll see only these first 2 spawned, despite having these 2 here as well, because these 2 are tier 1 ships, which will not be placed. You should also note this tool will only place ships up until the maximum HP. By default, you're allowed to have 24 HP in your fleet. Now in this case, I've got 6 of them. I've got 6 HP, so I could place 18 HP worth more of ships, and then it'll just stop. Something nice about this tool is if you're in creative mode, you can shift right click to just generate a random ship without needing to have it in your inventory. So in this case, this one got picked up even though I only had these 2 ships in my inventory. And same goes for fill mode, it'll just keep trying to place ships until I reach the maximum HP, which I've reached now. This is probably 24, 23, can't be bothered to count that. Let's just save it. Yeah, in this case it got ourselves to 24 HP. If you're ever unsure how your ship will be placed, a simple way to check is to just look at its recipe and find its empty hull component. In this case it's a large zigzag component for this ship. So let's grab that so I can easily show you. And basically the light blue square in the texture is the block that you're placing on. This ship will face the same way you're facing, and the grey parts indicate the other parts that will be used. So in this case, if I'm going to place the ship right here, it'll spawn 1 to the left, 1 above, and then 2 more above that and right, if that makes sense. If I just click this, I can visualize for you. Like you see, the parts match. This is how you place them. If you don't feel like going through the effort of looking at that, you can also craft yourself some ship display, which is pretty cheap to make. You can just place these down, just build yourself a nice big board, and just click it on it and just look at how it's spawned. Something you should know is, if you're in survival mode, placing ships on your board will not use your ship. They'll stay in your inventory, or you'll get them back. How about I just demonstrate that? Register. Like you see, I got it back. If you're placing on ship display blocks, it will be used up. You can't break them in survival modes, but instead what you can do is grab any pickaxe, doesn't matter what material it's made of, and just right click it and it will be added back into your inventory. Same goes for this one here. Again, here on board tiles, if you don't want the ship to be here, you can just right click to remove it. Of course, you won't get it back here because you didn't lose it in the first place. Let's demonstrate how an actual game of Naval Warfare works. For this I have a board set up already that we'll be playing against. Let's go ahead and load our own config, we'll just put it to load mode, right click the controller to ready it, grab ourselves a configuration we made. It's the same one over there for demonstration purposes. It'll load it, change over to request mode, and once we right click this, a game will start. Whenever a game starts, the game will first check which loadout has the least amount of HP, and if one of them has less than the other, the lower one will start. If they have the same amount of health, then the person that's been in queue longer will start first. In this case, that loadout was already there and we're using the same loadout, so our HP is the same, but they were in queue first, so they will get the first turn. In order to demonstrate how we can actually target tiles, I've decided to just let that opponent run out of time first. Let's go ahead and put our interactor into target tile mode, and let's fire our shot. Let's just fire a random shot first. And in this case we missed. Like regular battleships, if you miss, your turn is over. Now I'm going to be using this dummy game interactor to interact with this board. I'll explain what this item is later on. You will not be encountering this during normal gameplay, so don't worry about it. This is just so I can play against myself without being absolutely spammed with messages. So let's just go ahead and miss through. Let's go ahead and see if we can hit a ship. This is probably a good ship to hit. We're using the same loadout, so go. Like you see, we hit. Like in regular battleships, if you hit, you can keep going. Let's go ahead and destroy the ship. And now that we've destroyed the ship, we can see what ship we were hitting. Let's just go ahead and pass on our turn now. This is how basic gameplay will work. This is the battleship you're used to. You fire at one person, and if you miss, the other person goes. Like you saw, we were getting a hit streak. This is just a fun little feature I decided to add. This adds for some intensity to the game. Something you should know is you only have a limited amount of time to complete each turn. By default, I believe I have it set to 90. Oh, it says 60 seconds here, but it's 90 seconds. I'm pretty sure I changed it to. Once your time is about to run out, you'll be given a timer. That's amazing timing, it just showed up. And well, if you run out of time, like you'll see in a bit, your turn will be ended. So let's just let that end first. Like you see, they ran out of time again, so now it's our turn. In order to make sure that people don't just go AFK and ruin your game, there are limits in place for these timeouts. If you time out 3 times in a row, you will automatically lose the game. You can reset this counter to 0 by just using your turn. So in this case, if I let my opponent fire, his time is now reset, so if he were to time out again now, nothing will happen, he'll be fine. His consecutive timeouts have been reset. But in total, you can only time out 5 times. After your 5th timeout, doesn't matter how many turns were in between, you'll automatically lose the game. So be sure you just don't walk away or leave the server, whatever you're doing. One little thing to note about this is if you hit a ship during your turn, and you then time out, you will not get a timeout penalty. The timeout does still happen, but this is mainly because of some abilities in the game can, if used right, could wipe out several ships at once. So this timer is here just to make sure that you can't one-shot somebody. This way you always have a chance to fight back. In this case I ran out of time, so now I have a penalty. When you're playing a round of Naval Warfare, there are 3 additional tools you might want to use. The first one we'll be looking at is the info tool. As the name implies, this is going to give you information about the game. There are a few things you can interact with. If you interact with a board tile, it'll tell you its ID and its states. In this case we know this is empty, and we know this tile is hit. If you right click on a ship, let's take this one for example, it'll tell you what state the ship is in, it'll tell you if it has an active ability, how many uses it has, how much energy it needs, if it has a passive ability. All of that stuff will be told. I'm going to run out of time here, but that's fine. You can also right click any defensive block, which this particular loadout doesn't have any, but if I just grab like an energy shield for example, if your loadout has an energy shield, then you can also right click to see who deployed it and how much health it has. In this case, because I placed it, it doesn't belong to anyone, so it's basically nothing. It is just so you know. Something you'll also be encountering sometimes are these 2 blocks, ship here and ship close. These are also blocks you can interact with. Oops, did not mean to break that. And finally, probably the most useful one is your game controller. If you right click it, it'll show you what ships your opponent has left. If you shift right click your controller, it'll show you all ships, even the ones that are destroyed. Like you see, this one, the Nighthawk, which is destroyed, did not show up before. Let's then look at the ability ones. I'm gonna just pause the game real quick so we don't keep timing out. The ability wand is, as the name implies, is used to activate abilities. In Naval Warfare, most ships have an active ability and a passive ability. A passive ability will be activated without you doing anything. It'll happen automatically when the right conditions are met. And an active ability has to be activated using the ability wand. In order to activate an ability, just right click whatever ship you want to use. Let's demonstrate this one. You'll select a location, which I'll go into more detail what each ability wants. And then once you have the location set, right click your controller to activate it. And as you see, in this case we used our torpedo ability to fire a torpedo. We missed because I didn't have any time to check where I should fire. Each ability will need a certain amount of energy to be activated. In this case our torpedo cost us 6 energy, and like you saw before, this turn we had 16 energy. Each turn you'll be given an additional 5 energy up till a maximum of 16. If you want to know how much an ability costs, again, use the info tool. It'll say it right there. Just like regular targets, any ability that has the capability to damage a ship will end your turn if you miss. I lost the wrong tool, but that's fine. This is why I'm using the dummy interactor, because as you see I've got 2 messages now instead of 1. I'll go into more detail what targeting each ability needs and what each ability does. I'll show that later on. For now, I've shown you an active ability, the torpedo. How about I demonstrate a passive ability now? If I go ahead and hit this ship, for example, you'll see a passive ability activates, and it just fired back at us, because that is the ship's passive ability. Finally, the last ability, the last tool we'll be using is the spell ones. There are currently 4 spells available to use. Each game you play, you get 1 spell. You can use it whenever you want, it's free of charge, but you only get 1, so you'll have to use it wisely. In this case, let's go ahead and demonstrate one of them. Let's go ahead and demonstrate the Heat Seeker. Just like the game interactor, right-clicking the air will cycle it. And just like the ability wand, you select a target in the exact same way. In this case, the Heat Seeker is an offensive ability. If I try to fire it on my own board, it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and fire. Let's fire here. I'll explain what each spell does later on. I can activate it. And that is how you activate spells. Let's go ahead and finish a round. As you'll see, when we're destroying ships, as our speed increases, we will start to hear a more and more excited crowd. And just 2 ships left. And when we deal the final blow, we win the game. Now I should also note that for the rest of the spotlight, I do have our timers changed from 60 seconds to 10 minutes, so we shouldn't time out anymore when I start showing you all of the abilities. There are just a few final things to note about this section. As we've currently covered most things, something to note is that I'd like to ask you not to break any ships during games in creative mode. Obviously, breaking a ship would make it quite difficult to check whether it's damaged or not. So as of current, in survival, checks are in place to prevent you from actually breaking it, so you're not able to do it at all. But in creative mode, there is no way that we can guarantee it, so if you break a ship when you're playing a game in creative mode, or you break the board, or one of these filler tiles, or your controller, if you break any of those 4 things, you will instantly lose the game. So please be wary of that. You should also read these 2 sections inside removing ships. There's one passive ability called Seaworthy, which I'll demonstrate in a bit, that has a few limitations that can sometimes cause some issues when you're making your loadout. Just make sure you do read that section and you'll be fine. The only last thing to go over is the tips. Most importantly, as you see, one of these board tiles takes up a lot of blocks. If I were to constantly check whether there's like any blocks in the way during games, your game would start to lag quite a bit. So there are checks in place to make sure that everything is clear and ready to go when you spawn board tiles and when you start a game. If it can't fit the board anywhere, let's say I've got blocks here and I try to start a game, then it won't be able to place your opponent board here. And if that happens, it'll cancel the game and it'll notify you. It'll be like, hey, this block right here is not air, please remove it. If you place any blocks on here during games, you might run into issues, so please just keep it empty and nothing will go wrong, hopefully. Again, it says here too, please be careful. Obviously, if you're playing with friends, you want to make sure you're a bit of a distance away from each other, or just build a wall in between so you can't just peek over and see what your opponent has. And finally, something you should know is if you have the Naval Warfare guide in your inventory, it automatically comes with a feature to shift click on any ship, and it'll immediately show you the ability page. So during games, if you forgot what exactly an ability does and you want to just get some more info before you actually use it, you can just shift click on it, and the important parts are all in bold. So in this case, you immediately see travels 5 tile, deal 1 damage to use 6 energy. So it's quick and ready to go. And if you ever need more info, you can look at these blue links. Every ship has these, and you'll get more info about the type of ability you'll see. And that about covers it for the game requirements section. At this point, you know everything you need to know to play a game of Naval Warfare. If you want to, you can stop watching right here and you should be just fine. There are a few more sections we'll go over in a bit. We'll go into more detail about the passive abilities and the spells, which will give you a bit more information about how everything works and some strategies you might be able to use. But as for core concepts, this about covers it. Let's go over some of the abilities next. If you go to the ability section, you'll find an intro page, which will explain what each ability does. Like we explained before, there are active abilities and there are passive abilities. Active abilities can be further differentiated into two subtypes, offensive and defensive. Offensive abilities are abilities you'll need to use on your opponent's board, whereas defensive abilities are abilities you'll use on your own board. Passive abilities can be further differentiated into 5 different subtypes. The loadout subtype is only active when you're editing on your loadout. A game start passive ability will activate once when your game starts. A turn start ability will activate every time your turn starts. A ship hit ability will activate once every time the particular ship that has it is hit. And a ship destroyed ability will trigger when the ship it's attached to is destroyed. I'm going to be covering most of the ability types in a bit. There is more detail in the books as well about each ability. Some things you should know is that passive abilities that are capable of damaging ships will not trigger other passive abilities. So let's say if our opponent has the same loadout as us, and we hit a ship that fires shots back at us. If that shot hits a ship that does the same thing, that also fires back, it won't do anything. So there's no looping of just things firing back and all. This means you should also be careful, because some passive abilities that are in your loadout may help you instead of damaging the opponent. But if they're taken down by a passive ability, you'll lose it. The passive ability won't activate, it won't help you. So whenever you're playing a game, you should try to identify what kind of ship you're hitting. If you think you're hitting something that might take out one of your ships, if you hit it and you don't want to risk losing your own passive ability, you might want to wait and take down the ship later. Something else important to know is it is not possible to tie in this game. As soon as you sink the last opponent's ship, you will immediately win. Even if that ship has an ability that could damage you back, it simply won't trigger. So if you're in a scenario where you both only are one hit away, and you sink the last ship that would fire back, even if firing back could technically have caused a tie if it hit the right ship, it's not going to happen. First person to sink all opponent ship wins instantly. No tying allowed. Let's take a close look at some of the active abilities. I'll be going down the list, briefly explaining what each ability does. If you want to know more about, if you want to know additional details, you can just read each of the chapters. Each ability comes with a tips page that'll explain you, that'll give you some strategies you might want to use, some things to watch out for, and it'll show you which ships have that ability. Starting off with bombers, let's select a bomber. A bomber will target an area and drop a certain amount of bombs on it. In this case, this particular ship will drop 5 bombs. And we had 2 hits in this case. Something to know about bombers is that bombers will be countered by anti-air. As you see, our opponent is using anti-air as well. So if we try to bomb that area, our bomber gets shot down. The next ability we'll be looking at is deployable anti-air. Let's select a deployable anti-air. This is a defensive ability which needs to target our own board. And when we activate it, it'll spawn a single anti-air tile for us. If our opponent tries to bomb this area, it'll be counted, just like regular anti-air. Next ability is energy gain. Energy gain will restore a certain amount of energy to you. In this case, this ship will restore 3 energy. So let's use it. This ability does not need any target, so you can just use it right away. And as you see, I just got an additional 3 energy. The next ability is energy overloaders. In order to demonstrate this, I will first have to give my turn to my opponent. Since our opponent doesn't have any shields right now, let's go ahead and give him a shield. We'll cover the spells later on. Just know that this spell will give him a shield, which will come in handy. Hitting a shield will completely block the attack and will reduce the shield's HP by 1. However, any energy overloader will instantly destroy the shield and damage the tile below. So in this case, if we go ahead and select that tile right there, you'll see it destroyed the energy shield. It's completely gone. Next up, we'll look at flares. Flares will target an area and will scan the area for ships. Each flare will always only select one ship. When it's selected a ship, it will grab the 3x3 area around that particular tile, choose a random spot, and place a ship close block. Whenever you see the ship, you know there is a ship part somewhere in the 3x3 part surrounding it. If we go and look at our opponent, you'll see that it was likely one of these 2 parts that was chosen. This block will stay here until you target it. As soon as you target it, it disappears. The next ability to look at is a frag bomb. A frag bomb starts off as a regular attack. However, if the attack hits, then it will shatter and spread several fragments. In this case, this particular shrapnel bomb will give us 3 bits of shrapnel. which means we damage 3 additional tiles. The initial bomb can be blocked by energy shields, like most regular attacks, but the fragments cannot. If a fragment is spawned, it will always damage the tile. So let's go ahead and target this tile. As you see, we could see both the initial tile we were targeting and the tiles that would be chosen for shrapnel. Since the initial one hit, the shrapnel was also spawned. If you miss, these tiles will be cancelled. Next up, we'll be looking at ghost ships. Ghost ships are deployed on your own board. You simply select a tile, and the ability will choose a random orientation to spawn the ghost ship in. This particular ghost ship will spawn a 3x3 one. Let's go ahead and use it. And a little ghost ship was spawned. Ghost ships act just like regular ships, except they do not have any abilities. Your opponent does not have to destroy these to win. These act more as decoys. So, if my opponent targets that tile, they can hit it, but I won't lose any health from it. Next up are missiles. Missiles act like regular shots, except they will do more than 1 damage upon hit. This particular missile here has 2 damage. So let's go ahead and use it. Let's just hit this little guy again. And upon impact it did 2 damage. Now let's look at mortars. Mortars select an area. In this particular case, this mortar is quite a large area, and they will drop they will choose several tiles at random to target. If you look at this one, this particular one will target 9 tiles out of the 25 that we target. Let's go ahead and cast it now. And in this case we got a little unlucky, we only got 1 hit. Mortars are countered by shields like most regular attacks. Next up we have napalm. Napalm acts like a regular shot, but upon impact it will set the ship on fire. Let's go ahead and fire it here, which I believe should hit this ship, which is about 5 tiles away. So yep. Let's fire. Once a ship is on fire, it will take 1 damage each turn until destroyed. So if we end our turn, and our opponent uses their turn, then you'll see this tile was just damaged. Next up, salvos. Salvos are a very simple ability. They will target tiles in a line, and it will damage all of them. So let's go ahead and fire. And we got 1 hit. Next up, we have sea mines. Sea mines are deployed on your own board. Let's see, yeah, we can use this one. You just select the ability, select a tile to deploy it on, and cast it. Sea mines, when hit, will fire back at your opponent. So let's end our turn. And if our opponent targets this tile, we'll automatically fire back. In this case we even got a hit. Next we have shield placers. Shield placers, as the name suggests, will place a shield for you. If you want to target beneath a ship, you'll have to target it very carefully. You should be able to select it. There you go. Let's say we want it here. Of course, normally your ships won't be this close together, so it'll be a bit easier to select. And it'll spawn a shield for us. this case, this particular ship, if I click the right one, will give us a 2 HP shield, which we can verify. As you see, there's 2 health left. So this will block 2 hits for us. Next, we'll look at spy glasses. Spy glasses will select an area and see if there's any ships there. Any ships it finds are marked. As you see, these ships have gotten marked, which we can verify over here. There are indeed ships in these 2 locations. You can still move after this since it doesn't damage any ships. Torpedo decoys are next. A torpedo decoy is deployed on your own board. When deployed, it'll spawn a torpedo net which will protect you from torpedoes. Let's see what happens if we target our decoy. You see, as soon as it hit the torpedo decoy, the torpedo got destroyed. Which, conveniently, we'll be looking at torpedoes next. I kind of already demonstrated it there. Each torpedo will always start in a line. It'll always start at the beginning of the board, no matter where you select it. It'll travel tile by tile until it hits. Each torpedo has a certain amount of health. Each time it hits a ship, the health will be reduced by 1. For most torpedoes, the health is just 1. Except the one we just used over there. That one has more health, but we didn't get to use it yet. Didn't get to showcase that. If you look at this particular case, this torpedo travels several tiles and deals 1 free damage. Let's go ahead and cast it. In this case, because the ship is at the beginning, it exploded right away, but we already saw a bit of traveling earlier. Finally, the last active ability is turrets. Turrets are once again deployed on your own board. And as long as your turret is alive, you have an infinite amount of salvo abilities you can cast. You can't shift click this one. This salvo in particular will always target 4 tiles and cost us 8 energy. Then you'll see, let's fire here, that we can fire a salvo off. And you'll see this thing, it has 1000 USS, so it'll last you the entire round until it's destroyed, which just takes a single hit to destroy. Let's look at the passive abilities next. First passive ability is Anti-Air. Anti-Air is deployed when your game starts and will protect you from any bombers. So if we have our opponent's bombers, make sure that actually it's gonna hit us. It should. If our opponent tries to bomb us, you'll see it got shot down. Note that when it gets shot down, the opponent will be notified which tile shot it down. Next up, we have Counterfire. Counterfire will fire back when hit. So if we go ahead and make our opponent hit one, you'll see that some shots were fired back. In this case we got lucky, we got 2 hits. Counterfire will target random tiles. Next up, we have Energy Grant. Energy Grant will give you extra energy when the ship is destroyed. So if we go ahead and destroy a ship that has this ability, or we completely forget that it's covered by an energy shield, that's also fine. Anyways, this ability will give you energy when it's destroyed. We'll see that in a bit once I get rid of that energy shield, which is the next ability we are looking at anyways. As you saw, an energy shield will protect you from any incoming attacks. Note that energy shields do not protect you against torpedoes or the heat seeker spell, nor any fragments from frag bombs. Those are the only things that will go through it. Anything else will be blocked. Once a shield runs out of health, it'll despawn. You see, our shield is completely gone now. And now we've gotten extra energy. In this case we're already at the maximum energy, so we don't get any extra. Next up, Energy Start will give you extra energy when you start a game. It's a few turns back that it's activated, but when we got our first turn, we got some extra energy. Guardians will shield ships upon death. Like, as you see, right now we don't have any shields. This particular ship has a Guardian ability that will shield 2 other units with a 2 HP shield. So if we have our opponent destroy it, then you'll see that 2 ships were shielded. It'll only shield undamaged tiles. In this case, this tile is already damaged, and so is this tile, which is why the shields here are missing. Next up, we'll look at Major Insight. Major Insight will trigger when the ship is destroyed and will reveal 1 tile of an opponent's ship. So if we go ahead and destroy this ship, and my bark is destroyed, you'll see this tile was scouted. So we now know that there's a ship here. Similar to Major Insight, Minor Insight will also reveal a ship when this ship is destroyed. The difference being, it'll reveal the approximate location instead of the exact location. So as you see, in this case, one of these tiles was chosen and a marker was placed close to it, which we can see as well. Next up, Retaliation is similar to a missile in that it does more than 1 damage, and it activates when the ship is destroyed. Retaliation will always hit a ship. So a missile is fired back, and it hit this ship. In this case, this particular one will do 3 damage. Seaworthy is the only passive ability that is active during your loadout. When using a ship with Seaworthy, you will get additional tiles to use. As you can see, there are some extra tiles here and there are some random filler tiles in here. That is because this particular ship gave us 7 extra tiles to use. Something I should tell you about the Seaworthy passive ability is that due to the way that breaking blocks and placing them works inside of Minecraft, it gives us some issues when I try to spawn extra board tiles or remove some. In order to make sure that it's harder for people to cheat by like getting more ships or getting more tiles than they should have, or breaking blocks, the only way I can do that is by having these ships that have Seaworthy abilities reset the board if they're removed. So please be wary if your ship has that ability and you remove it because you want to put it in a different place, or you try to give it a random place with the utility tool and it doesn't find a place right away, then your board will be reset and you'll have to re-register your ships. So if you have any of those ships, it would be wise to get them placed first and make sure you're happy with where they are before you place the other ships. Suppression is the same as counterfire, except it activates when the ship is destroyed and will generally fire back more cannonballs at once. time we got extremely lucky and we got 5 hits of that. Torpedo nets will counter any torpedo and destroy it. So if we go ahead and fire a torpedo, which hopefully I have enough energy for, and as you'll see, torpedo net instantly counters it. Just like anti-air, torpedo nets will show where they blocked it. Torpedo nets are always deployed at the beginning of your board, no matter where the ship is. Turn ender, as the name implies, will end the opponent's turn when the ship is hit. So I believe, which one are we targeting? This one. And as you see, even though we hit, our turn was ended. Finally, Whirlpool acts the same as suppression, except it always targets empty tiles. It'll never target ships. So here. And as you see, everything missed. Last thing to show are the spells. There are 4 spells in the game right now: the sonar, the crude raft, the heat seeker, and the magic shield. You've already seen the heat seeker and the magic shield in the spotlight. The heat seeker will target a 3x3 area, and if there is a ship in that area, it will home in on it and deal 1 damage. The heat seeker does not get blocked by shields. The magic shield is targeted on your own board and will spawn a 4x4 shield that has 3 health. The last 2 abilities are the sonar and the crude raft. The sonar will target the opponent in a 5x5 area, and it will reveal any deployables in that area. In this case, right now I don't have any deployables to showcase, so nothing will happen. But basically, any, if you just go over here, any deployable anti-air, ghost ships, sea mines, torpedo decoys and turrets will be revealed. Let's just cast it. It's not going to do us anything right now. As you see, nothing happens because there are no deployables. If there were deployables, it'll place the same blocks here you've seen with the spyglass. Finally, the last spell is the crude raft. You'll use it on your own board, and when used, it summons a 1 HP crude raft. This raft will stay for 3 turns, and then it will destroy itself. As long as this raft is still alive, you will not lose the game. So, if I go ahead and destroy my last ships, as you see, all our ships are destroyed, but we haven't lost yet since we still have the raft. Let's go ahead and miss. Now, if I've been paying enough attention, this should be the last turn we have. If my opponent were to destroy this, I would lose, but I'm going to let it time out. As you see, our 3 turns were up, the raft destroyed itself, and now we don't have any ships left and we lost. There's only a few more miscellaneous things to go over now. So let's go into the miscellaneous section. The first thing I should let you know is how you're going to get more ships. If you're looking at the recipe for a ship, you'll find that each ship follows the same pattern. You'll need an empty hull that matches its shape, which is crafted quite easily. You'll need a few icons that represent its abilities. In this case, this ship has a ghost ship ability and an energy grant ability, so you need those icons to make it. and you'll need a hull that matches its tier. In this case, Paradox is a tier 3 ship, so you'll need a tier 3 hull. You can obtain these hulls in a few different ways. There's currently 6 tiers of them. The tier 6 will come in a future update, so you can ignore that one for now. You can craft each next tier by combining 2 of the previous tier. And as you can see here, you can find these hulls inside of dungeons. You can find them inside the captain's cabin. You can trade them with retired captains. The latter two I'll show you in a bit. And if you're playing in survival mode, finishing a game of Naval Warfare will also give you a random hull. If you win, you'll have a better chance at getting a better hull than if you lose. But one thing you should notice, if you forfeit the game, you will not get any rewards. So try to see games through to the end if you can. Each ship belongs to a specific tier. Right now there are 7 tiers. Tier 6 and 7 are planned for future updates, so you will not be able to get any of those now. A tier 1 ship is a ship that has no abilities at all. These are ships you'll be able to use to play classic battleship without any abilities. Tier 2 ships have basic abilities that don't do a whole lot. Tier 3 ships are a bit stronger, they'll help you a bit more out. Tier 4 are ships that are quite powerful. And Tier 5 are ships that, if used correctly, can change the course of the game. In future updates, there will probably be mother ships, which I'll explain in a bit. They will count as Tier 6 ships. And there will also be admin ships, which will be creative only, just for fun ships that will be extremely overpowered. They will be mostly just for fun, and they'll be Tier 7. The captain's cabin is a structure you will find spawning in taiga biomes and in plains biomes. This is what it looks like. It's a very basic house. Inside you'll always find a retired captain and a random ship on some display blocks. The random ship will usually be a tier 1 ship, so one of the 5 basic ones, with each increasing tier being less likely to spawn. But if you're lucky enough, you might just walk into one of these and find a tier 5 ship waiting for you. There's some chests with some loot in here for you. And at the back there's a little shed, which has some additional loot and which will sometimes also spawn hulls for you. The retired captain himself will trade with you. Okay, I've gone ahead and just traded him up so I can display the trades. A level 1 retired captain will trade you a tier 1 icon for emeralds, or an emerald for a tier 1 icon. A tier 2 villager will give you tier 2 icons, or trade for tier 2 icons. A tier 3 will trade for tier 3 icons and will buy tier 3 icons. In tier 4 you'll be offered 2 different hulls. The first one will always be a hull between 1 and 3, and the second one will always be a hull between 3 and 5. Then you'll be offered, on tier 6, you'll be offered a tier 1 to 3 ship in your first slot, and a tier 4 to 5 ship, a tier 3 to 5 ship in the last slot. In order to use the dummy game interactor, you'll first need to place a game controller that has no owner. By default, if you place down, you'll automatically own the block. If you want to place one without an owner, you simply use the set block command. Just find some coordinates you want to place it, hit enter, it'll place a game controller for you that has no owner. You'll need to use the dummy game interactor first on it to make sure nothing goes wrong. So let's say create, and now this controller has become a dummy controller, which you can use for testing. The dummy game interactor works the same as the regular game interactor, except you can't obtain this in survival mode. You should only be using this if you know what you're doing. This is mostly used for testing the mod when I'm on my own. Basically, it allows you to use a dummy game controller, which we've just made, to play against. So it acts as a separate player. You can do all the actions you normally want. You can load something. Let's go and do that. You can find a game with it, just like we've been doing. And the main difference this will do is any interactions you make with the dummy game interactor here will not give you any feedback or close to no feedback. So that way, if you can play against yourself without spamming your chat log completely and without making it unclear which of the two's turn it is right now. But yeah, like I said, only use this if you know what you're doing. In this chapter of the book, you'll find any future updates that I currently have planned. As for regular updates, over time I would like to add new ships, new abilities, new spells, etc. These will be the most common updates. There will also probably be some balance changes. This is the first time I've ever made something like this, and I haven't really been able to test this on a large scale yet. So some ships may be a little bit too overpowered, maybe somewhat too underpowered. I'll be listening to feedback from people, adjusting ships over time. And probably in the first few weeks we might get some balance changes, but no promises there. As for a particular additions update, at some point I may add a battle log that will sort of record what happens during a battle and then give you a log or an item you can use to view it again. This way, if you ever want to watch back one of your battles, you can do that. I may also add a simplistic AI so that people who would like to play this in single player will also be able to play it. Keep in mind this AI will likely be a while. Admin ships are also an update that are planned. They will be the tier 7 ships with extremely OP abilities. These will be just for fun and creative only, as it says. Finally, the motherships update is the biggest update I have planned. Motherships will be tier 6 ships, which are 3x3, so 9 HP. You'll be allowed to have at most one of these per fleet. You won't be forced to have one. If you want to play without them, you can. Each mothership will typically have powerful abilities combined with some sort of drawback to balance things, which you can also find here. At the moment I have a few motherships already planned. I'm not going to be going into detail about these just yet. If you want to know more about it, you can just click on them inside of here and read about it. One important thing to note is all of this future update is there's no guarantees these are actually going to be in. These are just my current IDs. These things may change over time. When making this mod, one thing I kept in mind is the community. I would like for people that want to contribute to the mod to be able to do so. If you would like to contribute, the instructions for it will be briefly mentioned in here. I should say right away that the precise instructions, the most updated versions, will always be found on CurseForge. So what I'm gonna tell you right now in this video may not be accurate in the future anymore, so you should check the CurseForge page for this first. Basically, right now there are 45 ships in the game, and it's getting harder and harder for me to come up with unique IDs, unique ability combos, unique designs, etc. If you think you've got a great design and you would like to make a ship for it, there are instructions to help you get started in here. The same goes for items and animations. If you want to make an item for your ship, there are instructions for that too. If you want to make animations, which are the things you keep seeing during battles, you can do that. There are instructions for this as well. And there's a few ship models right now that could use some improvement that I'm not too proud of. They're listed in here. If you ever feel like remaking one of these, feel free to do so, and if I like it enough, I might have it replace the original model. in which case I'll probably move the original model to tier 1 so that there's more tier 1 ships to use. The very last thing to mention in this spotlight is the credits. You can find all of the credits for everything in the mod inside this section here. Some miscellaneous text credits are in here as well. Some special thanks can be found in here as well. And finally, SailCraft, which, if you didn't catch it at the beginning, is this whole mod is basically based on the SailCraft Battleships Online mobile app, which shut down some time ago. And this mod is essentially kind of my version of it, my tribute to SailCraft. That's all for this spotlight. Thanks for watching and hope you enjoy the mod.